This tutorial is for 5th grade, Module 5, Lesson 10. In this lesson, we're going to find area of rectangles, especially when one of the dimensions is a fractional unit. The first problem is just a review of finding regular area of a rectangle. The directions say, write the dimensions and draw the units on the rectangles. We'll use multiplication to confirm the area. So rectangle A is 3 units long and 2 units wide. So I'm going to write those dimensions right on the rectangle. So we have 3 units long and 2 units wide. Now I'm going to draw those on the rectangle. So I need 2 rows to represent the 2 units of the width and 3 columns to represent the 3 units of the length. Each of these squares represents the square units that make up the area. So we can see that we have 6 units that make up the rectangle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's because 2 times 3 equals 6. In the next rectangle, my dimensions are 3 units long and 2.5 units wide. So the 3 units in length, that will be the same as the first rectangle. So I'll draw those columns again. But this time along the side I need 2.5 units. So my 2 units would be the same as up above. So I'm going to draw in 2 units. That would be these 2 rows. But I also have a half unit. That will be this strip at the bottom of the rectangle. Now let's start by counting the full square units. Just like above, in the 2 by 3 section, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because 2 times 3 equals 6. But in this last strip, I have 1/2 and 1/2 and 1/2. I have 3 halves that make up that bottom strip. So my answer is 6 and 3 halves. I'm going to take that improper fraction and use a number bond to change it into a proper fraction. 3 halves would be the same thing as 2 halves and 1/2. 2 halves is the same as 1 whole. So altogether I have 6, 7 wholes and 1/2. So the area of a rectangle whose dimensions are 3 units by 2.5 units is 7 and 1/2 units squared. Let's look at another example. Rectangle C is 5 units long and 1.5 units wide. So the 5 units in length will run along the side of the rectangle. That means I'm going to divide the rectangle into 5 rows. The width is 1.5, so that means I'm going to divide it vertically into 1 unit and a half unit. So if I draw that in, I can see that each of these units represents 1 whole unit. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wholes. Each of these pieces is 1/2 of a unit. Altogether, I have 5 of those, so I have 5 halves. Again, we'll use a number bond to break the improper fraction into a whole number and a leftover fraction. If I'm working with halves, I know I can take 4 halves and turn that into 2 wholes. That leaves 1 other half as part of my measurement. So I'll combine the 2 wholes with the 5. That gives me 7. And then I have my 1/2 left over. That means that a rectangle that's 5 units long, 1.5 units wide, has an area of 7 and 1/2 square units. Here are a couple more examples. This one says rectangle D is 2 units long and 1 3/4 units wide. So we're going to show that it's going to be 2 units on the length, and I'm going to divide the rectangle into the 2 rows. The width is 1 3/4 units, so I'm going to show 1 3/4, and I'll divide that. Now we need to count up each of these pieces. So this is one hole, this is another hole. Here I have a 3/4 and another 3/4. So I have two rows. Each row is 1 3/4. Altogether, I have two holes and 6/4. 3/4 and 3/4 make 6/4. I use my number bond to break this down into 4/4 and 2/4. I'm doing that because 4/4 is the same as one hole. I'll combine my hole numbers. That gives me 3 holes, and then I have 2/4 left over. So a rectangle that is 2 units long and 1 3/4 units wide has an area of 3 2/4 squared units. Now rectangle E is 5 units long, but it's only 3/4 of a unit wide. So we'll show the 5 units along the side, and I'll break that into 5 rows. Now my width is only 3/4 of a unit. So each of these pieces is only going to be 3/4, because saying 5 times 3/4 is the same thing as saying 5 rows of 3/4. So each of these rows represents 3/4. Now I just have to add all of my 3/4 together. Well, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. I have 15 fourths. Let's break that down to show it as a mixed numeral. Since I'm working with fourths, I can take 12 fourths to make 3 holes, and then that would leave me 3 more fourths. So my final answer is 3 3/4. So a rectangle that is 5 units long and 3/4 units wide would have an area of 3 3/4 squared units. Let's look at one more question. This one says a rectangle has a perimeter of 7 feet. If the width is 3 feet, what is the area of the rectangle? I'm going to start by writing an answer statement so I know the focus of the question. I'll say the area of the rectangle is blank square feet. Now let's go back to the problem. The first information says that the perimeter is 7 feet. Well, I know if one side of the rectangle is 3 feet, then the other side also has to be 3 feet. So perimeter is the distance around the entire rectangle. These two sides make up 6 feet. If the perimeter is 7 feet, then I know I have to take that last foot and divide it across the other two sides. That means each of these would be 1/2 feet. 3 and 3 is 6, 1/2 and 1/2 is 1. There's where I get the 7 feet for my perimeter. Now the question is, what is the area of the rectangle? So if I think of this as 3 columns, I will break it into 3, and each column is 1/2 of a foot. I'll mark that in here, just like we did in previous problems. So that means I have 3 sections. Each section is 1/2. Altogether, that's 3 halves. 3 halves can be broken down in a number bond into 2 halves and 1/2. 2 halves is the same as 1 whole, and then I have my extra 1/2. So the area of the rectangle is 1 1/2 feet.